Here's a look around the harbor in the daylight. The winds have started picking up. I like to put a bungee cord around my halyards because they're all external, just to keep them from slapping against the mast. It's super annoying in the marina. I do on both sides. It's super annoying listening to the halyards slamming against the mast. And I hate when other boats in the marina don't bungee up their halyards either. For a swim this morning, there's a nice, really shallow reef up here. Lots of fish and sea life. Just rowed ashore. Like it's about time to get going. I tried to row the dinghy ashore for one last beer run, but the wind was so strong I was actually going backwards. Luckily I was able to grab onto the boat, so I didn't have to jump in and tow the boat ashore. But that was kind of a bummer. So I guess it's gonna be a dry run towards Oahu. No big deal though. Sailing out of the channel with under the jib alone. I'll go ahead and put the main up once we get a little bit more sea room. The sun just set. We've got about 20 knots coming out of the northeast. Should be a nice downwind passage over to Oahu. Man, it feels good to be out in the water again. We got a nice breeze, following seas, sailing into the sunset. I think one of the things sailing represents to me is the idea that you can just head out to sea and leave whatever problems or worries you have on land behind for a little bit. When the conditions are really good and the boat's doing what you want, it just gives you such a boost. And then on the other hand, when the conditions are really bad and you're struggling to, manage sails and you got the element of danger and discomfort, that'll totally take your mind off whatever you're worrying about. So either way, you go out to sea, it'll put you in a different mindset. The wind just died, but the waves are still real big, so at least we have that going for us. They're rocking us right on the beam. I think it'll probably pick up within not too much time and we'll get moving again. Wind just picked up again, so we are sailing once again. Cruising along about 4 knots. Very comfortably now. It's 3 a.m. now. The wind's kind of doing circles around us, very light. Having to get up a bunch to adjust the wind vane. I wish I had my electric one working now. But I'm getting some sleep. I'm taking like 15-minute naps. The sun's just about to come out. We've been sailing for 12 hours. We've only done about 25 miles because we were just drifting for quite a few hours last night. What kind of bird are you? My feathered friend's been pooping all over the boat. Oahu's coming up in the distance. Really neat landscape. A bit different than the other islands. Of course, there's a big city right up there. I've probably got a couple more hours before I make landfall. So I figured I'd share how I make the boat steer itself and I'm able to sleep at night. The main secret is this contraption back here. This is called a wind vane. This particular one is a Wind Pilot Pacific Light, and they're made in Germany. They're pretty pricey, but they're definitely worth it. I paid $2,500 for this one, new. That was the same price I paid for the entire boat. I found it was worth every penny though. So basically the way it works is set the boat on the heading you want, and this thing will steer the boat according to the angle of apparent wind. So we're going at about, on a beam reach, about 90 degrees. So I've rotated the wind vane to face into the wind, and as you can see, as the boat drifts off course either direction, it will knock the wind vane this way or this way. And what happens there is it transfers that motion through a push rod to a set of bevel gears. The bevel gears rotate this paddle in the water, and then the rotation of the paddle, because of the motion of the boat, swings it either left or right, and then that motion moves this control arm up here, which is led through a set of blocks to the chiller. So a slight deflection in the wind vane as we drift off course quickly amplifies the motion using the power of our speed through the water, and that turns into a course correction at the chiller. It requires no power at all. As the wind picks up and the boat speed increases, it becomes more powerful, so it's able to, put a lot of force on the tiller, and it steers based on the wind direction. So, for example, if the wind shifts a few degrees, if I was using a magnetic autopilot, electronic autopilot with a magnetic heading, the boat would keep on the same course, but the wind shift would, a lot of times it would mean I would need to go up and adjust the sails, because they would either need to be let out or eased in, they would start luffing. With this way, if the wind shifts a little bit, the boat just kind of alters course, which is really what I prefer when I'm doing long distance sailing passages, because I don't really mind going off course a few degrees. I'd rather the boat just keep on sailing with good sail without having to wake up and change the sails at night, and just kind of deal with a slight change in course. Obviously, a downside is then if the wind is making big changes, you're going to have a lot of trouble and having to change the wind angle, course adjustment on the unit a lot. So when you're kind of closer to land masses, it's not, and the wind is shifting more, it's not quite as ideal. Also, this is using the apparent wind and not the true wind. So if the boat wind is increasing or decreasing, the apparent wind is changing, your course is going to change a little bit there too. So it does have its downsides. It also, you can't use it while motoring. So I keep both. I have electronic autopilot, which I attach to this bracket here. I use that when I'm motoring, and then I also have this for longer distance stuff because it uses no power. It's completely quiet, and it's very, very reliable. It steered almost the entire trip to Hawaii, even in pretty light winds. I guess if the boat slows down too much, it doesn't have enough, water flowing through that paddle to make it work. But for the most part, it can steer in pretty much any conditions. This is the electronic autopilot. I keep it inside of me. I'm not using it because they're prone to stop working. And that's actually a Simrad TP10. So basically, it's just you set the course left or right and turn it on automatic, and then this is like a robotic arm that moves in and out, and it attaches to the tiller here, and then my bracket on the coaming back here. The electronic autopilot is especially nice for in harbors and channels where you really need the boat to stay on the course you set it on and not wander around as the wind shifts. And it's also useful for putting up the sails, coming into an anchor or mooring where you need to kind of run around the boat a little bit. That sort of thing. The downsides, of course, are it does use a little bit of power, not a whole lot on a boat this size. If the conditions got really strong and there was a lot of force needed to move the tiller, it could kind of theoretically become overpowered and not be able to steer the boat. I haven't really run into any trouble with that yet. It's done pretty well even in some big following seas for me, but those are kind of downsides. It is a little bit noisy. That's another downside. Then if for some reason I can't use either of those for self-steering, I like to have a tiller extension just because it lets me lay down comfortably in the cockpit, and I can steer the boat without having to kind of really focus on steering. I can just kind of stare at the stars and just kind of steer based on like the feel of the boat, and that's much less draining than having to kind of sit up and hold a tiller. You can just kind of lay down and kind of just hold this under your arm and then just kind of feel how the boat is handling and steer like that. I'm able to steer for many hours at a time that way, and it's much less tolling and tiring with the tiller extension. That guy just clips in like this, and this is what I used before I had either of the other self-steering. And then also I've experimented a little bit with some sheet to tiller steering. I've had limited success. I was able to keep a downwind course with it. Upwind is obviously pretty easily. You can just lash off the rudder most of the time in this boat. Downwind's always a challenge, but it did work. Kind of the theory behind that is, in its most basic system, I think it's you run the jib sheet to a block on the opposite side, and then from there it goes back to a tiller and then a bungee to kind of like center the tiller. And as the jib powers up, it puts more pressure on the sheet, and it kind of can control the boat just based on like how much pressure is on the jib. It's a little tricky because you got to kind of balance the tension over on this side with the bungees or stretchy surgical tubing, and then the lengths on this, and then sometimes you have to add some blocks to adjust the mechanical advantage if the genoa is too large. I think the sheet to tiller is definitely worthwhile to experiment, especially if your boat is maybe a little less tender than mine, maybe has a fuller keel and better course keeping ability. Just for me though, it would require a little bit too much intervention. It would hold the course for about 10 minutes, and then a wave would knock us off course, or a puff would kind of change the heading. But there's a really good book on self-steering that goes into a ton of detail on sheet to tiller. You probably have most of the materials on board to set one up, so it would make a really great backup for your wind vane or autopilot system. Self-steering is just so crucial for solo sailing, and being able to get enough sleep is not something you should overlook. Before I had the self-steering systems as figured out, there were definitely a couple trips I can think of where I kind of had to abort and come back early just because of fatigue and not being able to stay up and steer for as long as I had in the past, just sometimes due to other circumstances like bad weather, cold, or seasickness. There's Diamond Head. The waves are getting real steep as we get closer. I think we kind of went over a shallow part, so maybe they'll get smaller as we pass it. Flipped over. Looks like they got it back up though. Make sure they're okay. Seems like they know what they're doing. Alright, they got their canoe flipped back over. Anchorage. There's just some big waves that take a little canoe out like that. Water is so clear. I just dropped anchor right off of Waikiki Beach. The chart makes it look like I can't go any closer, but I'm like a half mile from shore, so I don't think I'm going to be rowing to shore today. It's Sunday, so I can't get I'm sure the harbor office is probably closed. But tomorrow I'll go ahead and see if I can get a slip, and then I can go ashore. Pretty nice, clear water, about 30 feet, sandy bottom, but there's definitely a few rocks. I put the probability of snagging on something pretty high. I'm looking forward to jumping in and going for a swim. The water looks pretty nice. It's getting pretty hot out here.
Hercules, this is
with our new friend Glenn. He swam out to see me. I decided we'd weigh the anchor and sail a little closer. It doesn't have quite as far to swim. The jib right now. So we're going to be able to get a little closer. Maybe make the night a little more pleasant in the anchorage too, if we can take out some of my trash. It's just like the glamorous life of sailing. Bye, Glenn. He's got a ways to go. That's about a half mile to swim. Had a great night at anchor. Wasn't too rolly, pretty much just like this all night. I just called the Ala Wai marina. They were able to get me a slip. It's a side tie, and I guess there's power too, which is always a plus. Looks like there should be just enough wind to sail in today. Clean up some of this mess from my last passage. Set out a few fenders and it'll be good to go. Oh, by the way, that was really fun doing the first live chat yesterday. Sorry if you missed it. I was just kind of experimenting with it. But next one I'll make sure to announce, and I'll probably do another one in a few days. Took out the jib, and we're moving along at about 3 knots with that, so that's more than sufficient. We've just a little less than a mile to go to get into the harbor. Roller furling jibs certainly have their pros and cons, but for those instances when you just need to move the boat a short distance, it's so convenient being able to just unroll a little bit of jib, move the boat, and then roll it back up without ever even having to start the motor. Really beautiful anchorage. It's really neat having the city right in front of the mountains and then Diamond Head over here, and the water is just super clear. You can see the bottom so easily. I could see it probably getting a little rough in some instances, but last night was pretty calm. Oh man, that's a big sea turtle. Zoom in on it. Trying to film with one hand, sail with the other, and then tie a knot with your third hand is kind of tricky. There's the entrance up here. No one's steering the boat. This is the Hawaii Yacht Club on the right here. I went in on the wrong side, so we gotta turn back around. Definitely a nice thing about having the fin-keeled spade rudder. You turn on a dime. This is a huge marina. I haven't been in a marina this big in quite a while. Docking went pretty straightforward. It looks like we have power and water, which is always a bonus. And it's a floating dock too, so it's kind of nice. A little easier setting up the fenders.